The refrigerator hummed, the only sound in my kitchen at 2 in the morning, right before Jonah said my name in a voice I'd never heard him use before. Not the voice that teased me about burning toast into charcoal, not the one that read grocery lists over the phone like they were something worth savoring. This one shook. "Nora," he said, "there's something I should have told you the night we met." My stomach dropped straight through the floor. Because some part of me had already known, the way you know a storm is coming before the sky changes color, that this was the reason behind every time his eyes had drifted somewhere I couldn't follow. My name is Nora Bennett. I'm 27, and up until that night, I would have told you that loving Jonah Rays was the easiest thing I'd ever done. He was steady in a way that made you forget you'd ever needed to brace for impact, the kind of steady where you stop checking the exits in a relationship because you finally trust the room isn't on fire. That night, standing barefoot on the cold kitchen tile with a glass of water sweating in my hand, I learned that his steadiness had never been simple. It had a cost. And he'd been quietly paying it since before the two of us officially existed. To understand what he told me, you have to go back 14 months, to an ordinary Tuesday in March, when my father had a heart attack in the garage while fixing the lawnmower he'd refused to replace for 6 years running. I was at work when my mother called, her voice so calm it scared me more than screaming would have. By the time I got to the house, there were two ambulances angled across the driveway, lights turning the front lawn red and white and red again. Neighbors standing at the edge of their yards in bathrobes, not sure whether it was polite to look away. I remember sitting on the bottom porch step because my legs simply stopped working, and I remember a paramedic crouching in front of me at some point in the chaos. Just a shape, really. Backlit and blurred, telling me in a low, even voice that they were doing everything they possibly could. I don't remember his face. I remember his voice. I remember how steady it stayed even 20 minutes later when it had to deliver the worst sentence of my life. My dad didn't make it. Walter Bennett, 61 years old, grease still on his hands, dead in his own garage on a Tuesday that had started like every other Tuesday. Grief doesn't behave the way movies promise it will. It doesn't crescendo. It sits down next to you and stays there, quietly rearranging the furniture of your life until nothing is where you left it. I went back to work 2 weeks later because it was easier than the alternative. I stopped answering my mother's calls after 9 at night because I couldn't survive one more. "How are you holding up?" without something in me cracking audibly. And when my roommate Priya showed up in my doorway 11 months later holding two dresses and an invitation to a rooftop birthday party, I almost said no. The way I'd said no to nearly everything that year. But she had this look on her face like she wasn't accepting another closed door, and something in me finally, quietly agreed with her. That's how I ended up on a rooftop in July, string lights crossing overhead like something out of a movie I wouldn't have believed if I weren't the one living it, when Priya grabbed my elbow and said, "Okay, don't make it weird, but I need you to meet somebody." Jonah was leaning against the railing with a beer he wasn't really drinking, laughing at something his friend Marcus had said. When he turned and actually looked at me, I remember an odd little flicker, not a memory exactly, more like deja vu with no visible source. I blamed the wine. "Nora," Priya said, "this is Jonah." "Jonah, Nora, he works with Marcus. Works with him is generous," Jonah said. "Mostly I keep him from doing anything stupid on shift." "Complete lies," Marcus said without looking up from his phone. "Complete and total lies. We talked for maybe 40 minutes that first night, nothing important, the kind of small talk that's actually a string of tiny tests, seeing where the other person laughs. He asked what I did. I told him I managed a bookstore downtown, the one with a cat that technically wasn't allowed but stayed anyway because nobody had the heart to enforce it. "Does the cat have a name?" "Dennis." He nearly choked on his beer. "Somebody named a bookstore cat Dennis. That might be the most human thing I've heard all week." I asked what he did. There was a half-second hesitation before he answered, so brief I convinced myself later I'd imagined it. "EMS," he said. "I'm a paramedic." Something in my chest pulled tight, though I couldn't have told you why yet. "That sounds intense," I said. He shrugged, the kind of shrug that's clearly practiced. "Some nights. Mostly it's paperwork and bad coffee." His voice made it sound smaller than I suspected it actually was. We started seeing each other properly by August. Quiet dinners at the taco place 2 blocks from my building, where he always ordered too much and made me finish half of it. Long walks where we didn't talk much and it never once felt empty. Phone calls that started at 10 and somehow stretched to 1 in the morning, because neither of us wanted to be the one who said goodnight first. On our third date, he showed up with a paperback he'd bought at my own store that afternoon, just so he'd have an excuse to ask me what I'd recommend next, and I remember thinking. Watching him flip it over to read the back cover with genuine interest, that I hadn't felt this specific kind of lightness in over a year. He remembered things, small things, that I liked my coffee strong enough to apologize for, that I ordered the same soup on days I was anxious without ever telling him which days those were. He just noticed the pattern and never mentioned it, just made sure I had it. That Dennis the cat had a favorite windowsill and got sulky if someone else sat in it. It was the kind of attention that made me feel, for the first time since March, like I existed in 3 dimensions again instead of just getting through days sideways. But there were things he didn't do, and it took me longer to notice the shape of an absence than the shape of a presence. He never talked about specific calls, not one, not even the ones paramedics are supposedly required by law to have a stockpile of for parties. One night in September, Marcus made an offhand joke about that call last spring, the garage one, the lawnmower guy, and Jonah's face did something I didn't have a name for yet. He changed the subject so fast it left skid marks on the conversation. I didn't think much of it at the time. Garages and lawnmowers aren't exactly rare vocabulary in a city this size. The first real crack came in October, on a night we'd gotten caught without an umbrella halfway through a walk and ducked into his car, laughing, soaked through. Windows fogging up while rain hammered the roof. It was, if I'm honest, one of the best nights of my life. His hand on my jaw, the world reduced to the small, dry space of a front seat. A kiss that felt like it had been waiting for exactly that kind of weather. And then, driving me home after, I mentioned, just in passing, the way you mention a dentist appointment, that the anniversary of my dad's death was coming up in a few weeks, and that my mom wanted to do a small dinner for it. Jonah went quiet, not distracted quiet, careful quiet like a man picking his way across ice he wasn't sure would hold. You okay? I asked. Yeah, a beat too long. Yeah, sorry, that's good. That you're doing that for him. You're being weird. I'm not being weird. You're being weird, Jonah, he laughed, but it came out thin, unconvincing. Long week, he said, bad calls. I don't love work stuff bleeding into this. Into us, I let it go, mostly because I understood not wanting work to follow you home. My own job had its share of miserable customers I didn't bring back to his apartment either. But some part of me filed it away, a tab left quietly open in the back of my mind. We had our first real fight 2 weeks after that, not about anything as large as what I'd eventually learn, but about the shape of it. I told him I felt like there was a locked room in him I wasn't allowed into. He told me some things weren't about trust, they were about not wanting to hand someone else his worst days along with the good ones. I told him that wasn't his call to make alone. He said, quieter than I'd ever heard him, "You have no idea what you're asking me to hand you," and then apologized almost immediately, said he didn't mean it like that. And we went to bed angry for the first time, both of us lying very still on our own sides of the mattress like the border of a country neither wanted to cross first. In the morning, he made my coffee too strong on purpose, the way I liked it, and set it by the bed without a word, and it wasn't an apology exactly, but it was something, and I took it as something. He canceled our plans on the actual anniversary in November. Said a shift ran long, said he was sorry, said it 3 separate times in a text that felt like it was carrying more weight than 3 sorries should reasonably carry. I told him it was fine. I told myself it was fine. But the next morning his eyes looked like a man who hadn't slept, and when he hugged me hello, he held on about 4 seconds longer than a normal hug requires. Like he was trying to absorb something through contact alone. The thing that finally cracked it open happened in January. At a fundraiser, Marcus dragged both of us to a benefit dinner for the County EMS Memorial Fund. One of those events with a silent auction and a slideshow looping silently on a screen behind the bar. I was standing near it with a glass of wine, half listening to Marcus complain about an argument with his sister, when a photo scrolled up. A crew photo, 6 paramedics in uniform outside a station. A date stamped in small white text beneath it. My eyes caught the date before they caught the faces. March 14th. I don't know why my body understood before my brain did. My hand went cold around the wineglass stem. I found Jonah in the photo, younger looking, exhausted looking, standing at the end of the row, and under it the caption, Unit 12 responding shift March 14th. My father died on March 14th. I stood there doing math I didn't want to be doing, telling myself there were a dozen ambulance crews rotating through this city on any given day, that this was nothing. That grief makes you spiral over coincidences that don't mean anything. But when I looked up, Jonah was already looking at me from across the room, and his face had gone the color of the tablecloths, and I understood. The way you understand a fall a half second before you hit the ground, that it wasn't a coincidence at all. I didn't say anything that night. I smiled through the rest of the dinner like my chest wasn't quietly splitting down the middle, and he drove me home mostly in silence, both of us pretending it was because we were tired. That silence followed us for 3 more days, thin, humming, underneath every ordinary thing we said to each other until I couldn't stand beneath it anymore. I called Priya first before I called him, sat on my bathroom floor with the phone against my ear and said, I think Jonah was there, the night my dad died. I think he was one of the paramedics, and Priya went so quiet on the other end that I knew somehow she believed it too. You have to ask him, she said finally, straight out. Don't let him make it small. So I did. I showed up at his apartment that night without calling first. I don't fully remember everything I said, only that it ended with the two of us back in my kitchen 2 hours later, me with a glass of water I wasn't drinking. Him standing by the counter looking like a man confessing to something he'd rehearsed 100 times in his head and still couldn't get right out loud. The refrigerator hummed on, oblivious, filling the silence neither of us could. Nora, he said, and this time I let him have the quiet instead of filling it for him. I was on shift the night your dad died, he said. I was there in your driveway, I talked to you on the porch steps, I told you we were doing everything we could. The kitchen tilted a little. I set the glass down carefully before I could drop it. I didn't recognize you right away at Priya's party, he said. It took me most of the night, something about your laugh, and then when you told Marcus your last name, it just landed. All at once. I thought about leaving right then. I told myself I'd say something the next week. Then the next week became the next month, and the longer I didn't say it, the more it felt like something I couldn't say anymore without losing you completely along with it. Why didn't you? My voice cracked clean in half. Why didn't you just tell me? Because I couldn't save him, Jonah said, and his voice broke on the word the same way mine had. We did CPR for 11 minutes. I remember every second of it. I remember you on those porch steps, and I remember thinking I was about to be the reason someone's entire world changed shape, and I was right. Then 11 months later, I looked across a rooftop, and there you were, laughing at something Marcus said, alive and warm and nothing at all like the girl I remembered on those steps. And I wanted, God, Nora, I wanted so badly to know you as someone other than that. Not as the daughter from a call I couldn't save, just as you, and every day I didn't tell you was one more day I got to have that. I hated myself for it, I still do. I didn't cry right away. I did the thing I always do when something's too enormous to feel all at once. I went very still and asked practical questions, because practical questions felt survivable in a way emotion didn't. Did you request a transfer near me? Did you know Priya beforehand? Was any single piece of this a coincidence or all of it engineered? He answered every one, steady even though his hands weren't. No, he'd never met Priya before that party. The invitation had come through Marcus, who'd known her for years through an entirely different circle. The only thing that hadn't been coincidence was what came after. The choosing, day after day, not to say the thing that would have been so much easier to leave buried in a call log somewhere. I asked him to leave. Not forever, I said it out loud even though I wasn't sure yet whether I believed it, but I needed one night alone with a story that had just doubled its own size without warning. He didn't argue. He just said, okay, in a voice that had already made peace with the possibility of losing me and let himself out, and I stood in that kitchen until the sun came up, turning the whole thing over like a stone in my palm, searching for the sharp edge that was supposed to cut me. I never found it. What I found instead, somewhere around 5 in the morning, with cold coffee going filmy in the mug and an old photo of my dad propped against the sugar jar, was this. The man who'd held on through 11 minutes trying not to lose my father was the same man who'd spent 11 months trying to give me a version of my own life that didn't start with a tragedy every time he looked at me. He hadn't lied his way into something. He'd stayed quiet to protect the one thing that had felt untouched by that night, us, before I even knew there was a before us to protect. It wasn't the story I'd have chosen for how we started, but it explained every strange, quiet moment I'd filed away without a name, the flinch at the word garage, the 4-second hugs. The anniversary he couldn't sit across a dinner table and pretend was ordinary. I called him 2 days later, not because I'd forgiven him in some tidy, movie-ending way. Forgiveness, it turns out, wasn't actually the thing I needed to decide. What I needed to decide was whether 11 months of him choosing me, quietly, in ordinary, unglamorous ways, remembering my coffee, holding on to hugs a beat too long, staying steady when steady was the hardest thing in the world to fake, outweighed 11 minutes he hadn't told me about. When I finally let myself ask it that way instead of the other way around, the answer wasn't complicated at all. He came over that same night. We didn't fix everything in one conversation. Some things you have to keep repairing in small pieces for a long time, and honestly, we still do on the hard anniversaries. On the nights his shifts run long and old ghosts crowd back in for both of us at once. But he sat down at my kitchen table in the same spot where he'd broken open 3 days before, and this time when the silence came, it wasn't the kind that's hiding something. It was just quiet. Ordinary, unremarkable, safe quiet, the kind you only get to have with someone once every true thing has finally been said out loud between you. My dad never got the chance to meet Jonah. But some nights I let myself think he already had, for 11 minutes, in a driveway, in the worst moment either of them would ever live through. One of them fighting with everything he had to keep the other one here a little longer. It isn't the love story I would have written for myself if you'd handed me a pen a year and a half ago. It's better somehow for being so completely, unglamorously true. Thank you so much for spending this time with me and with Nora's story tonight. If it made you feel something, if some part of it sat with you the way these stories are supposed to, that's really the whole reason I keep doing this. If you'd like more stories like this one, stick around, subscribe, ring the little bell so you don't miss the next one landing in your feed. And I'd genuinely love to know, has something like this ever happened to you? Has someone ever told you the truth about how your story with them really started and changed everything you thought you understood for better or for worse? Or maybe you've watched it happen to someone close to you. Tell me about it in the comments. I read every single one, and honestly, some of the best stories I've ever told on this channel started right there. Until next time, take care of yourselves and the people who are quietly choosing you every day. I'll see you in the next one.